And joining us now in studio, Bruce Philp, author of Consumer Republic, Using Brands to Get What You Want, Make Corporations Behave, and maybe even save the world. Hello, that's a big promise of a title.
It's a little bit of a big promise.
Okay, we have to talk about Mad Men right off the bat.
Sure.
So in Mad Men, advertisers, guys in the business are soulless, they're greedy, albeit they're very good looking. I'm wondering, you've been in the advertising business for many years. How many Don Draper types have you met?
Well, they exist. I mean, I started in the business in the early 1980s, and in those years, there were kind of two sorts of advertising people. There were actually very idealistic, intellectually disciplined people who really saw themselves as part of an important process, and then there were extremely cynical people, exactly as you might expect from the industry. What I think both those groups had lost versus the time of Mad Men was arrogance. I don't think we were quite that sure that we were in control anymore.
That's a good thing, I presume.
I think it is a good thing.
So you got into advertising. It's an interesting trajectory you took. You say it was your failure at calculus, so you're bad at numbers, that somehow got you into advertising. Make that connection. What was that journey?
Well, to me, being lousy at calculus kind of epitomized what a lousy student I am. The advertising business is full of autodidacts. If there's anything that characterizes a typical advertising person, it's a complete absence of success in institutional settings. So I really fit that mold. The fact that numbers may be, a pathological problem for me, notwithstanding, I went to college to learn how to do stuff instead of expand my mind, and I found myself quickly among friends when I got into the business, surrounded by autodidacts like me.
It was my failure in physics that led me to a career in journalism.
Right.
So
well,
there you go.
Yours is a little more noble, maybe. But
I don't know. I like to think so, though. I want to talk to you about brands and logos, because when I think of the word brand, I immediately in my head attach it to logo. The swoosh, the apple, the jug of colored Kool-Aid or whatever it is. But you look at the word and the idea of brand differently, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, a brand is in its essence a kind of cultural phenomenon. When I teach this, I tell students to think about a brand as a promise. And as prospective marketers, that's how I want them to think about it. You're going to go out into the world and claim to be able to do something, and you'd better understand that that's going to come back at you somehow. But in reality, a brand is nothing more than a commercially valuable reputation. It doesn't much matter what the name is or what the logo looks like. If I can associate a reputation with your name, and if that reputation bears in some way on your ability to make money, then it's a brand.
So give me an example of the promise that Pick Your Brand makes.
Well, I think the brand that we all love to talk about these days is Apple. It's the example of choice for everybody, and in that case, I think Apple's license to be a brand began all those years ago in 1984, when they essentially said, without saying it, that the purpose of a computer is to liberate human creativity. So that's what we're going to do. That, in the broadest sense,
that little shiny apple. That's what they were. They knew they were saying that.
We had no trouble connecting that promise to that symbol at all, which really is what a logo is for. I mean, I think that people in my business tend to worry a bit too much about logo design. I think they need to be attractive and they need to evoke character so that we have some sense of what the personality of the organization is going to be like. But at the end of the day, they're nothing more than physical symbols that branding intends to imbue with some meaning.
That attachment to symbols, I think for most of us, myself included, really starts as a teenager. That's when you really get interested in the idea of logos. For you, what was it when you were a teenager? What brand and logo were you attached to?
Well, I grew up in a largely rural environment, and in the 1960s and 70s, and in those days, brands were very much expressions of personal choice, and unapologetically so. Your tractor was a certain color; it was going to be green or red or blue, and you smoked a certain brand of cigarettes, and you drank 50 or blue, or export, and you had a favorite hockey team, and so on, and those choices were all equally as as deliberate as choosing a favorite hockey team was. So I was kind of surrounded by that stuff. Like all teenagers from that day to this, the sort of dawning of autonomy had a whole lot to do with the right to spend money as I chose. The first thing that I spent money on, as most kids did from the end of World War II to the beginning of the 90s, The first thing I wanted was blue jeans. And where I went to school, and I love to tell this story in speeches and presentations because it's so emblematic. Where I went to school, being a rural school, blue denim did not automatically mean rebellion or autonomy. It could also
by London
mean
you went
work.
to school, right? London,
just west
Ontario,
of London,
right?
that's right. In deepest, darkest southern Ontario. And so in the school that I went to, we had to get around the risk of confusion that if I was wearing a certain brand of blue jeans, was I working that morning in the barn, or was I being Marlon Brando? And the solution to that was Levi's. And so when it was time for me to buy my own pair of blue jeans, that's the brand I wanted more than life itself.
You're not still, no, you're not wearing jeans today.
Not today. I did.
But you still wear Levi's?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway.
I do.
I guess a lot of people still do. It's a brand that's, has just sustained itself all these years.
Without a doubt. I mean, they went through some dark years in the 1990s, largely at the hands of a generation that was disinclined to participate in tribal branding. But I find it interesting that Steve Jobs, or Saint Steve, I guess as he's quickly becoming, wore Levi's 501s. And the reason for this, I think, was because of what they weren't. They were kind of quintessential blue denim. They weren't trying to make a statement. They weren't the same sort of statement that you'd make if you were wearing Citizens of Humanity or Cinch or Carhartt or Hugo Boss. They were quintessential, and that was so important to his personal brand. So yeah, they still have a lot of power.
In your book, you introduce us to a fun game to just explain to us and get us to realize how ingrained brands are in our culture. Explain 5 Brand for us.
5 Brand. So this was the brainchild of an advertising guy in Brazil. And his challenge to anyone who stumbled on his website was to say, okay, just pick 5 brands that as completely as possible describe who you are. And there were 2 things about this experiment that interested me, and he's actually migrated the whole thing to Facebook now. It's still very active. There were 2 things about this that interested me, and one was how easily people were able to do this. The ease with which we used brands as a language of social meaning as opposed to just a commercial kind of concept. And the other was how, when he first started it, the vast majority of people who took the test were people who worked in the branding business. And that may seem on the surface unsurprising, but to me, knowing how hypersensitive, advertising and design people are about their personal images, I wouldn't have thought that they would expose themselves that way. I would have thought that they would see themselves as somehow above this game, and yet they were naked and honest about the brands that had meaning for them and that kind of defined them.
Okay, I'm putting you on the spot.
Right.
Describe yourself in 5 brands.
I don't know if I can remember the 5 that I described. I mean, I had to pick Apple because I just, so does everybody. But I love its single-mindedness and its determination not to kind of listen to people, but to kind of bring people something. It's a kind of arrogance that I respected. And I also picked Porsche, and for the same reason. That company is quirky and stubborn and strange and willful and always has been. And I love that. I'm not particularly a fan of marketing by permission. I may have chosen Levi's. There's a brand west of clothing and outdoor gear called Filson that I love their uncompromising, kind of quality promise and their determination at any cost to deliver that. And I guess you can kind of see by the brands I'm giving you that there's this theme of uncompromising individuality in them, and I guess that's me.
I haven't done the game to myself, but I don't know. I was just thinking about maybe No Name for me. I don't know. And it made me think about No Name, the brand No Name. That seems like utter genius to me, that you're being seen as not branding yourself, yet you're branding yourself.
Yeah.
That's
without
the
a
goal.
doubt, without a doubt, and therefore it's a brand. If it has social meaning, and that social meaning is somehow of commercial value to the people who own it, then it's a brand.
People on Madison Avenue need to care about this. This is the business they're in. Why should I, as a consumer, care about brands?
Well, I think there's 3 reasons. I think, first of all, it seems to me indisputable that where there are brands, there's choice, and where there's choice, consumers have power. And there's mountains of proof that that's so, and there's mountains of proof that when you remove choice from the equation, consumers are disempowered. And in this country, you only have to look at categories like telecom and airlines to see how true that is. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that brands make corporations accountable. People reflexively object to this idea. It's like, oh, brands are tools for manipulation, and I'm like, show me the proof, because the proof that I have, what I have seen happen is the more famous a brand is, the more terrified that corporation is to do anything untoward. And the third thing, maybe the most contentious thing that should make us care about brands, is that they are socially useful. They're an unspoken language that we're all quite literate in, through which we're able to communicate with each other and kind of express ourselves. And at this point, the sort of anti-corporate tribe are, I'm sure, foaming. But I actually think consumerism is a form of self-expression, nearly creative, and I think we'd be poorer without it.
Okay, you said show me the proof. I am going to show you the proof. It comes from Naomi Klein,
right,
who you write about in your book.
Yeah.
She put out no logo about a decade ago. She certainly has a different view of branded marketing than you do. So let's take a little listen to her when she was on TVO.
Because these brands are so interwoven, particularly in the lives of young people, and because branding has become so much more aggressive in recent years, some labor organizers started realizing that if they came at young people through their logos, right? Said, I'm not talking to you about sweatshops in the abstract. I'm talking to you about Nike, which you happen to have tattooed on your navel at the moment, or I'm talking to you about Disney, which you've been cocooned in its logo your whole life, or I'm going to talk to you about the Gap, right, which is sort of sending you quasi-fascistic messages that everybody has to wear vests, and I think that what happened is that because it played on two issues at once. One of the issues was this feeling of being over-marketed to, growing up under the marketing microscope, and saying, and in a way that there was already, if you'll forgive the phrase, a market for a backlash against these brands because of the invasiveness of that marketing.
Okay, Bruce, is it fair, as Naomi Klein says, her criticism, to link corporate malfeasance to a company's brand?
Well, it depends on how you're asking me the question, because I think her choice to do that was why that book was so successful. I don't actually think it's a particularly intellectually honest kind of conceit, but it was very effective. The fact is that brands, the fame of a brand and the extent to which that fame bears on a company's profitability, it gives the consumer huge power over the corporation's behavior, because simply
what do you mean by that? How do
afraid.
I exercise that power?
Well, let's take the example of Nike, which she's very fond of. Nike comes up some 37 times in the book. She's really got a problem with Nike. And I should point out, Naomi Klein herself in 2009, in an interview with The Star, described that book as politically unsophisticated, and I think that's a fair assessment. Nike was singled out by Naomi Klein at the height of its power culturally. People were, Michael Jordan and all, and this is the late 1990s. It was massive and growing and global, and the swoosh was recognizable everywhere on earth. So Naomi Klein scared the pants off Nike. And when I was researching my book, I happened to fall into a great resource in the form of a research company in Switzerland that tracks the ethical behavior of corporations around the world. And they track more than 500 of them, and their process is algorithmic. It's black box, so they go through press releases and other sort of web content, and they identify whether they've been good environmental stewards, labor relations, human rights, violate all this kind of everything you would hope. And they come up with a ranking, and I think they publish this ranking quarterly now. Nike, when I did the research for the book, was among the 10 most ethical companies in the world. And in fact, almost all of the top 10 were brands that you might find in your own home. So my contention is that if Nike needed redemption, Naomi Klein actually caused that to happen, but she caused it to happen by threatening shame on their brand. And I think that's the ultimate proof that this brand fame and this idea that their sustainability as a business depends on it gives us leverage.
There is certainly, though, that perception that the corporations, are malicious, they're out to get us, we're all just being duped. You say, though, that the corporation is cow.
Right.
Tell me about that.
For the sake of alliteration, you could pick any animal that you like. There was a film produced some years ago called The Corporation, based on the brilliant conceit that that if you look at the way corporations behave, you could conclude that they are clinically sociopaths. And my reaction to that is, well, okay, but I'm not sure what we do with that because I don't believe corporations really have any collective intent other than to make money by any means possible and legal. And so we might be more productive to think about corporations as just being kind of single-purpose organisms. there's no good can come of an adversarial relationship with corporations, I don't think. Whereas if we just accept them for what they are and understand that they're going to do what works and not what doesn't work, we're much more likely to create some kind of rapprochement.
But if brands and consumerism can be seen as a catalyst for change, why do we see this growing sentiment? I think it's a growing sentiment. My anecdotal evidence, I read these things in papers too, that corporations are malicious. They're the bad guy. Why are we seeing that?
Well, we're in a difficult moment right now generally in our culture. There's an opposition to wealth of all sorts, and there's an opposition to power of all sorts.
The 99%, the sentiment of the 99%.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of abnormal, and I think there's a huge quiet majority, who feels a little bit differently or doesn't feel as strongly. An example I would give, you cite the 99%, the Occupy Wall Street phenomenon last fall. There was a Gallup poll published just before Christmas that said that in the United States, at any rate, public concern over income inequity had actually declined through that high PR kind of period. I think people in the main are more pragmatic than that. We live in a time when the most kind of energetic voices are easily heard, and they make good TV. But I'm not sure that's actually how most of us feel. I think that most of us on most days, even if we're not highly conscious of it, like the fact that if I am disappointed in that tube of Crest toothpaste, Procter Gamble has a lot to fear from me. We like that.
Branded marketing, we talk about Levi's, it sort of stayed for a long time, but there has been a huge sea change in how things are branded and marketed to us. So I want to just play a little bit of a commercial from the late 70s. Take a look at this one.
I drink Dr. Pepper, don't you see? 'Cause it's the perfect taste for me. That original taste, is making peppers everywhere I go. There's boating peppers, toting peppers, cooking peppers, good-looking peppers. Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too?
I never understood what wouldn't you like to be a pepper too, but I remember that slogan so well. Would that kind of advertisement work today?
No, I don't think at all. I'm kind of surprised it worked then. I mean, it makes me cringe to
What did that mean?
watch it. Well, I cited in the book, kind of tongue-in-cheek, as a reference to the fact that marketing used to be able to depend quite a bit on inclusion, or the promise of inclusion, as a way of making brands attractive. So this whole idea of tribes built around brands, kind of reached its apogee in the 80s. So if I was a up-and-coming, ad guy with no place to go but Madison Avenue, you could kind of put together the package of brands I should relate to. You should be wearing a Hugo Boss suit, and you should drive a BMW, and you should have a Rolex, and you should have an American Express Gold Card. There's a kind of a mise en place for stuff you ought to have if you're going to be that guy. And what happened in the beginning of the 90s was a collision of two things. One was the recession, which was quite evil at the time, and there was a lot of disillusionment about aspiration. People were like, forget it, I don't want any part of this rat race. If all that's going to happen is I'm going to lose my retirement in one day in October because the stock market, I'm out. And the other was that Gen X, who had grown up in the shadow of the baby boom, started to come of age. And what they did, to make a very long story short, was they tore apart all that sort of taxonomy of brands and social tribes and said, I'm gonna pick this, but I'm gonna have one of those, and I'm gonna have three of those and one of those, and I'm gonna take that and that, and rip them all up and mash them back together. And they ended up using brands as kind of a palette for creating personal meta brands, and it was a way of subverting culture. And this was well written, well documented by people like Douglas Rushkoff. But they really single-handedly took control of brands on behalf of consumers, kind of once and for all. And from that moment forward, corporations have been chasing consumers around begging for approval.
So branding, 30 years ago was about being part of the group. That's how they marketed to us. Now it seems like there's so much focus on individualism.
Yeah.
What's the sea change there?
Well, I think it's been a very healthy change because what it's forced corporations to do with their brands is make them stand for values instead of for inclusion in a group. So if I know that you're going to have $20 imported mustard in your fridge, but your ketchup's going to be no name, and you're going to buy cheap beer, but you're going to have nothing but the best wine, I can't pin you down as a member of a social group anymore. So instead, what I'm going to try to do is be the most attractive option inside the category that you're shopping in, so that you connect to me not on a product level, but on a values level. So we're the same. So, you know, earlier when you asked about Five Brand, and I said, you know, I really like Porsche because of their quirkiness and their arrogance. Well, that's how they connect to me. It doesn't really have very much to do with the car.
Brands used to be about things, material things. Now it seems there's a shift to being about people as well. I mean, I think the most obvious example is President Obama in himself is a brand of sorts. Is it fair to attach brand to person?
I think that it sort of goes back to that definition that I offered up earlier, commercially valuable reputation. If you're running for president, then you're probably a brand, whether you like it or not. What we're seeing in a lot of life now is that people are kind of dealing with stuff more heuristically. So in other words, instead of looking at President Obama as a set of policy, decisions and as a political orthodoxy and as a vision for the nation, I'm just going to look at him for what he seems to be, as though I was casting for a film, and the way he talks and the way he carries himself, and I'm going to add all that stuff up and make a conclusion about what I think he probably is, and I'm going to act on that basis. And this same phenomenon happens in the grocery store and at the mall.
I guess the danger, though, of linking a person so closely to this is that that person falls from grace. Your brand and your reputation go down with it, and whatever they're marketing.
It can do. I mean, we're finding in the last few years that public memory is getting quite short, and our appetite for stories of redemption seems to be increasing. So I'm not sure it's that fatal anymore. What's happened in marketing is that instead of doing 100 things and having to get them right, you're doing 1,000,000 things, and you just have to get them kind of 90% right, and you'll get where you're going. I think the same is true of running for office.
So it's a short-term business now, as opposed to sitting back and taking a long-term view.
Yeah, I think the residual feelings that you get from marketing, they stay around for a long time and they accrete. But the specific facts of a particular instance, not so much. I mean, there's some great examples I could cite of things that were hot news and just we don't even think of them now 9 months later.
Give me one or two examples of a brand that you think is successful, not the apples and things that someone like me would think are, that we don't know about, but you think that is doing a wonderful job in being successful.
A brand that most people would not have heard of. That sort
I don't know.
Of thing.
I mean, just tell me something that you notice that I wouldn't notice when I think of something being a successful brand.
I think one of my favorite Canadian branding stories has got to be WestJet, and the reason I like it so much is that the brand that we know them to be has emanated out from the culture of the corporation, rather than being painted on by marketers or advertisers. I think they're having to contend with how you scale that and how you keep it authentic as people turn over. But in the beginning, the brand flowed from the leader's vision of what the airline should be and from what it was like to work there. And I'm a strong believer that the boundary between marketing and corporate culture has to be torn down. For a company to be real, for a company to give people work that matters, it has to, there can't be a boundary there. I blogged about WestJet several years ago, and it was kind of a grumpy blog, and I immediately got an email from Sean Durfee, who was then the CEO, and I loved how hurt he was by this, because that was not the company he thought he was running. Without sort of plugging them now, I was really impressed by that, and how he didn't see this as a branding issue, he saw it as a reputation issue.
I think there's probably some grumpy blogs about another Canadian airline these days
too.
The big philosophical question, I guess, is making that link between successful brands and human nature.
Yeah, there was it's funny that you mentioned that. There was a study published just this past winter in which, over the course of 10 years, researchers had looked at the fastest growing brands in the world and tried to understand what they had in common. And it was pretty scientific. It wasn't the sort of superficial market research that you sometimes have to contend with in the boardroom. And the conclusion that they reached was that the brands that seemed to be growing the fastest, and which, by the way, would have returned you the best kind of growth in your stock portfolio, were brands that were defined by what they called genuine human values. In other words, brands that seemed to be purposed towards making people's lives better, as opposed to selling something. And I'm sure it sounds preposterous that a corporation would take that view with its brands, but I assure you that there are many famous brands that are obsessing about this right now and have been for some years. So it was great to see how much good comes of leadership taking responsibility for brands rather than just marketing departments, and how doing that authentically and with good intention produces better capitalists.
This is a great, peek behind the curtain of a world I know very little about. Thank you for coming in. We'll talk to you again tomorrow,
It's a pleasure.
Bruce.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.